Hi folks, HR Funk here, with a new installment in the mini-series that I've been producing where I'm taking a close look at the Marine Corps' new M18 pistol and comparing it to those pistols in the Marine Corps' inventory that it's going to be replacing. Now, in past segments of this mini-series, I've looked at a comparison between the M18 and the 1911. I've done one on the M18 as compared to the Beretta M9 pistol, and most recently the installment that I did was comparing the M18 to the Glock 19. Now today's video is going to be a little bit different because I'm going to be comparing the M18 to a pistol that has actually never been used by the Marine Corps and to the best of my knowledge has never been used by any element of the United States military, and that is the Beretta M9A3. And the reason I'm doing this comparison is because many of you in the comments to these past videos have questioned why the military didn't just go with the updated M9A3 when they were looking at replacing the aging inventory of M9 pistols. Now, ultimately, I don't know the answer to that, but I thought this comparison was at least valid to see if we can decide if, after all the time and expense of going through the selection process for the modular handgun system, the Marine Corps and the other branches of the military really ended up with a superior pistol, or if maybe they would have been better off after all with going with the M9A3. Now, like many of you, several years ago when I learned that Beretta had updated the classic M9 and brought about the M9A3 pistol, I thought that it was a pretty good evolution of that classic military handgun, and I was very surprised when our military didn't even consider this before launching the selection process for the modular handgun system. And it was doubly puzzling when you consider the fact that our troops were already trained on this platform, armorers were used to maintaining it, there was a lot of support gear in the form of magazines and magazine pouches and holsters and all that kind of thing that would have transferred over to the M9A3. So why go to the time and expense of selecting an entire new handgun platform rather than just going with an updated version of the handgun that has been used for many years? Along with that, the M9A3 seems to mitigate a lot of the historic complaints that have been lodged against the M9 pistol. And by the way, if you're not familiar with what those complaints are, go back and look at the video I made a month or so ago called RIP M9, Why the Military Dumped the Beretta Pistol. And if you have any doubts about the veracity of the things that I talk about in that video, just go down through the comments to the video and you will see every one of those complaints that I discussed mentioned by someone in the comments who has used the M9 in the military, and you will see that those were very true complaints. Now, whether or not they were valid, that's another matter entirely, but they are complaints that have been lodged against the M9, and I think because of those complaints and the environment that existed in the military and the attitude toward the Beretta pistols, that brought about the circumstance where the M9A3 was not even considered. Now, there's one other point that I want to make here right at the beginning of the video, and that is because every time I've made an installment in this series, and some of the times that I've talked about military pistols in other videos, somebody comes along in the comments and says something like this: well, it doesn't matter what pistol the military uses anyway because battles aren't decided by pistols. As if somehow I don't know that, or I'm under the illusion that battles are fought with handguns and somehow decided by handguns or whatever. But I do know from firsthand experience that there are personnel in the military, just like me when I was in the Marine Corps, that are issued handguns on a daily basis. And for those troops, it is very important what handgun is selected and that that handgun be reliable and something they can depend upon to defend their life. Also, there are troops who rely on handguns as a backup to their shoulder weapon. And something else that's happening more and more in house-to-house fighting or room clearing or building clearing is handguns are being used by certain troops as they're performing those building clearing duties. Now, I had somebody in a recent video say, well, I wouldn't want to clear a building with a handgun, I would want to use a rifle. Certainly. But I also know, as a longtime SWAT team member, that we would have people in the team who were armed with handguns. They would not be the first person through the door, they probably wouldn't be the second person through the door, but they were a little farther back in the stack as we were moving in to start our entry for whatever we were doing that particular day. And their job was to be able to use their hands. If they needed to, they could quickly holster their handgun and use their hands either to deal with individuals that you had located while you were clearing the building and either restrain those individuals or search them or whatever. They could use their hands to move obstructions or do whatever else you needed for someone using their hands. So there are people even in those situations who are relying on handguns. Again, they are not the primary battle weapon, but they can be very important to those troops who rely upon them. So beginning the comparison, as you can see, I've got the M9A3 on the left and the M18 on the right. And as usual, I'll begin my comparison by looking at the construction materials. And for the M9A3, we have a steel slide and barrel, of course. And the steel slide and barrel are both Cerakoted in a flat dark earth finish. Now, one of the things you'll notice, and I don't know if you're going to be able to see it, but the finish on these pistols is not real robust. I've already got a little bit of wear on some of the high points on this pistol. You can see some over here on the trigger guard. And I have not used or carried this pistol all that much, and even so, I'm already seeing some finish wear. Now that said, this is not a collector grade pistol. This is a pistol intended to be used in hostile environments by military units, so a little bit of finish wear really doesn't make too much difference. The real question is whether or not it functions. The frame for the pistol is aluminum to reduce the weight just a little bit. We've also got the rubber grips back here, and these grips are replaceable. One of the things that changed with the M9A3 is that this grip can be removed and replaced with thinner plastic grip panels to reduce the overall circumference of the grip. Now, one of the things that people have said is that they believe the M9A3 was not considered by the military because it was not quote-unquote modular. And I would say because of these replaceable grips, the M9A3 is at least as modular as the Glock 19, which had the replaceable grip inserts. So the fact that the Glock 19 was not disqualified for not being sufficiently modular leads me to believe that the M9A3 would also have been sufficiently modular for the military's purposes. Now, one of the comments I made when I compared the M18 to the Glock 19 was that those two pistols probably have more in common than they have differences. And that is pretty much exactly the opposite of what we have here today. With these two pistols, other than the fact that they both share the rudiments of handgun design, such as barrels, triggers, and the fact that they both use a double column 9mm magazine, they probably couldn't be more different. The M9A3 operates on a system using a locking block that goes back at least to the 1930s, and I believe was first used in the Walther P38, whereas the M18 uses a modified Browning action, which features a tilting barrel that drops down to unlock the barrel from the slide during cycling. And between these two, I really prefer the Beretta action because it feels much smoother when you're shooting. It seems like there's not as much muzzle flip when you're shooting the Beretta pistol. And if you ever see someone who is really proficient at running a Beretta, you'll notice that you don't see much muzzle movement at all as they're shooting. There's going to be a little bit more with this style pistol using that Browning system. The other thing that I'll note right out of the gates is obviously the Beretta has a 5-inch barrel that's extended somewhat to allow for a suppressor, whereas the M18 has the 3.9-inch barrel. Now, I'm certain if the Marine Corps had specified that they wanted a shorter pistol, that Beretta could have reduced the overall length of this pistol and reduced the barrel length somewhat. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about differences in ballistic performance or not too much about sight radius because I'm certain that Beretta could have reduced that barrel length. And I mentioned in the last video that there are some Marines who have been using the Glock 19 for a while specifically because they have assignments that make it a little bit more accommodating to use the more compact pistol rather than the full-length Beretta M9A1 that the Marines have been using for several years up to this point. Moving on, we'll start at the top of these pistols and work our way down, beginning with the sights. And you can see that the Beretta pistol has the 3-dot system, and these are night sights. Now, one of the things that was incorporated into the modular handgun system that you do not see on the M9A3 is any sort of accommodation for a micro red dot optic. Now that has been improved or added in the M9A4. So again, I'm sure if the military had specified that, or if they had gone back to Beretta and said, we like your new pistol, but we want to be able to have the capacity to add a micro red dot optic, that the design could have been modified to accommodate that. But since it was never considered, that request was never made, therefore the M9A3 does not have that feature. Looking at the sights on the M18, we see virtually the same exact thing. The 3-dot system with the illuminated SIG light night sights. The M18 does have that accommodation for a micro red dot optic, so that was incorporated into the modular handgun design, but again, I believe it could have been added to the Beretta pistol very easily. So I hate to give an advantage to that, to the M18 over the M9A3, but I suppose I have to just because it is on this pistol and it's not on this one. Also, in looking at the top of the M9A3, we can see what is more or less the classic Beretta open top slide. And this has been criticized for allowing sand and dirt and foreign debris and such to get down into the locking block system and cause some functioning issue for the pistol. But I don't think I've ever heard that actually reported by anyone who's used one. Normally, the complaint with regard to sand has to do with the magazines and the ammunition failing to feed properly up into the chamber of the pistol. I don't think I've heard anyone complain that the locking block got full of sand or dirt or debris or whatever and kept the pistol from functioning. So if you're someone out there who has had that experience, please let me know in the comments section because I don't think I've seen that yet. Now obviously with the SIG design, the top of the slide is closed, so any concern for ingress on the part of dirt or sand or debris or whatever is pretty much negated. So no problems there with regard to the SIG design. And again, I question whether or not that's really a concern with the Beretta design, but it is something that at least has been mentioned and I wanted to discuss it here. Also on the slide of the M18, we see front and rear cocking serrations. That's something we don't see on the Beretta pistol, and I believe some of the newer variations of the 92 series do have some front cocking serrations, but that was not on the M9A3. That's another one of those things that I don't know how much difference it really makes, but some people really seem to like having those front cocking serrations, and that's something that was lacking in the M9A3. Here again, I'll say that had the government evaluated the M9A3 and gone back to Beretta and said, we really would like to have front cocking serrations, that's probably something that could have been added to the M9A3 without too much difficulty. Even so, because of the reduced dimension or surface area of the Beretta's slide, even if there were front cocking serrations, there would not be enough, or as much rather, to grasp with the M9A3 as there is on the slide of the M18. Moving on to the barrel of the M9A3, we can see the knurled thread protector intended to, as the name implies, protect the threads for installation of a silencer or suppressor. And this is something that apparently the government did like, because in the RFP for the modular handgun system, it specified that the submissions had to include a kit for adding a suppressor or silencer to the pistols that were being considered for the modular handgun system. Now, obviously, my civilian M18 does not have that accommodation, but the military pistols would have had that. So that's not really an advantage for the Beretta. That's something that I'm going to call a draw, because the pistols actually in use by the military will have that accommodation. Moving on to the safety, the Beretta M9A3 has the G-style safety, meaning that when the hammer is cocked and the decocker/safety is rotated to safely drop the hammer, when the safety is released, it returns to the up position. Now, the safety is one of those things that a lot of people did not like in the original M9 pistols. And part of this, I think, is due to the fact that at least some military units required their personnel to carry the pistol with the safety engaged. so that the pistol was put into action, the first thing the shooter had to do was disengage the safety before they could begin to shoot. And apparently that's just an awkward reach for a lot of people. I never carried a double single action pistol in that manner. I always carried it with the safety disengaged so that I was ready to fire that first double action shot, relying upon the long, heavy double action trigger pull to essentially be my safety, the same as I would do with a double action revolver. But with the Beretta pistol, again, the safety is, or I should say the decocker is rotated down and then automatically springs back up. Now the fact that that safety decocker springs back to the fire position also alleviates another complaint that historically was lodged against the M9 pistols. And I've demonstrated this before when performing a reload and using an overhand pull on the slide to cycle it and chamber around. It's possible with the standard M9 to inadvertently place the pistol on safe, and then when the shooter attempts to fire the pistol, it's not going to fire because the trigger is disengaged. That can't happen with the M9A3 because of this G-style safety decocker. If inadvertently the levers are pushed down during a reload, they're going to spring back up as soon as that's released. And of course I just bumped my light and made the picture look strange, so I'll fix that momentarily. Now conversely, the safety for the M18 serves no decocking function whatsoever. It is simply a safety to prevent the pistol from being fired, and when it's taken off or disengaged, the pistol can then fire. So as far as the safeties go, they each serve their individual purpose and they each reflect the trigger system that the pistol operates with. In terms of their ergonomics, I don't think either one of them is difficult to reach. And I probably shouldn't even call the one on the M9A3 a safety. I should probably just refer to that as a decocker. Again, I don't think this safety is difficult to use, a little bit difficult to engage. But if it's engaged, the important thing is, can the shooter come up and disengage it? And that is very easy. And it's just like a 1911 as far as that goes. So the shooter comes up, swipes the safety off, and the pistol is ready to fire. They are both ambidextrous safeties. And if I didn't point it out before, you can see both sides have levers for the decocker on the M9A3. So I think I'm going to call the safety function a draw between these two pistols. I really don't see a clear advantage. They both serve their respective purposes well. And with this G-style decocker on the M9A3, as I said, it does away with one of those historic complaints with regard to the M9 pistol. Moving on to the other controls for the pistol, we can look at the slide stop / slide release. And again, I think in terms of ergonomics, this is an easy control to reach. It functions well. But one of the things you'll notice is it is not ambidextrous. There is simply a lever on the left side of the pistol to release the slide stop, whereas with the M18 we can see that there is a slide stop / slide release on both sides of the pistol. So the M18 is definitely going to score a point in terms of ambidexterity with regard to the slide stop, and when it comes to the magazine release, it's going to be, once again, a draw because they both have reversible magazine releases. Obviously, I have mine set up as a right-handed shooter on the left side of the frame, but both of them could be reversed and moved over to the right side of the frame. So that's going to be a draw. When it comes to reaching the magazine release, it's a little easier with the M18. But most of that has to do with the fact that I have the larger grips on the M9A3. So even though it's a little bit more of a reach, it's not difficult to do. I have to shift the pistol slightly in my hand, but I am going to switch over to the other grips in a little bit when I start to do a circumferential measurement. And we'll see just how much difference there is in terms of the grip circumference with those thinner grip panels installed. When it comes to adding accessories to the pistol, it's once again going to be a draw. Both pistols have a Picatinny rail with 3 slots for lights or lasers or whatever other type of accessories might need to be added to the pistol. So there's really not a clear advantage there, but they do both easily accommodate whatever accessories the shooter might want to use. And both pistols retain the squared off front on the trigger guard for either a finger forward hold on the pistol or as a platform for the lasers and lights and such that are going to be installed on the pick rail. There is a little bit of texturing on the front of the trigger guard on the M18 for that finger forward hold, whereas the front of the M9A3 is relatively smooth. Even so, I don't think that is a tremendous advantage, maybe a small advantage for the shooters that use that finger forward hold, but not much in my estimation. Okay, let's move on to the grip characteristics. And on the M18, the grip feels very comfortable to me, and even more so than I expected it to. We can see that the bore axis for the M18 is a little higher than with something like a Glock, and I mentioned that in the last video. But even so, I think largely because of this grip contour, it doesn't seem to get quite the muzzle flip that I would expect with that higher bore. And also, as I mentioned before, this grip tang right here, seated right in this juncture between your thumb and forefinger, I think also goes a long way toward helping control muzzle flip. On the M9A3, with this grip installed, it is definitely larger. Now, I prefer the larger grip. It points a little bit more naturally for me with the larger grip. And still, we've got that grip tang right there to assist with the muzzle rise on the Beretta. But as I mentioned earlier, because of its operating system, it really does not have a tremendous amount of muzzle flip to begin with. So that's, again, one of the things I've always liked about the Beretta when I'm shooting them. It is a very flat shooting pistol. Both grips are comfortable. As I said, with this grip installed, this one is definitely bigger around. And I'm going to go ahead and take a measurement of the grip circumference and also the length to reach the trigger on both pistols. And I'll do this with both grips on the M9A3, and we'll see just how much difference there is for shooters with different size hands. So once again, I've borrowed the tape measure from my wife's sewing basket, and I try to get this measurement at the largest portion of the grip, and we can see on the M9A3 that's coming in at just slightly over 6 inches for grip circumference. And now I'll check the M18. And the M18 is about 5 5/8. So significantly smaller in circumference than the M9A3. But I'm going to switch the grips now on the M9A3, and we'll see just how much difference that makes. So when the grip panels are swapped on the M9A3, the pistol feels considerably different. Now, one of the things you'll notice with the rubber grips is this raised surface back here, which is very consistent with the contour of the original Beretta M9. And when that is removed, we have just a straight backstrap here, very reminiscent of the original 1911, truthfully, as I look at it right there. These panels are also thinner, and it gives the pistol a much different feel. It does definitely feel smaller. Let's go ahead and measure it now and see how much difference that makes in the measurement of the grip circumference. So interesting, there really is no widest point of the grip with the thinner grip panels installed, and the measurement is actually slightly smaller in circumference than the M18. So it could be argued that for shooters with smaller hands, the M9A3 would actually accommodate them better than the M18. That's something I have not looked at before today, and I find that very interesting. Now, when it comes to the distance from the rear of the frame to the front surface of the trigger, this really shouldn't change much for the M9A3. In fact, it shouldn't change at all, regardless of which grip is installed, because if the rubber grip is installed, obviously this area is exposed, and that's the portion of the grip that fits against the web of the shooter's hand. So this measurement should remain constant. And for the M9A3, that measurement is about 2 3/4 of an inch. Obviously that's getting to the front face of the trigger in double action mode. Now if the trigger is cocked, that's going to change considerably. And for the reach to the single action trigger, it's about 2 1/4 of an inch. With the M18, that measurement remains constant, and it is about 2 3/8 of an inch for the M18. So it's coming in right between the double action pull and the single action pull, actually a little closer to the single action pull with the M18 as compared to the M9A3. Looking at the grip's texturing, I've mentioned on the M18 before that this is what I would call a medium texture. It is not extremely aggressive. I think for most shooters it's going to be adequate. For shooters wearing gloves, especially the type of gloves that are used in tactical operations these days, it's probably going to be just fine. With the rubber grip on the M9A3, there is a pebble finish all the way around it, and this is very tactile. It feels almost sticky in your hand, as you normally get with a rubber grip. With the thinner plastic grips, there is checkering on both sides, and also we have checkering on the back strap and the front strap of the pistol, but it doesn't feel quite as secure in the hand as the texturing on the M18. So with the rubber grip, with the rubber grip installed, I think I would give the grip quality to the M9A3, but with the plastic thinner grips installed, I would give the points for grip quality to the M18. It just feels a little bit more secure in the hand than those plastic grips on the M9A3. Turning our attention toward the butt of the pistol and the magazine well, we can see the lanyard loop here on the butt of the M9A3, and also we see that the magazine well is pretty well beveled to assist with reloads. Now, one of the things we don't see here that we see on most of the pistols that were submitted for the modular handgun system is some sort of an accommodation to be able to grasp the base plate of the magazine and pull it out of there if the magazine is stuck. But it is a pretty big base plate to get a hold of, and I think if the shooter had to, he or she could grab that thing and yank it out of there. But it might not be quite as easy to do as it is with the M18, with these relief cuts on both sides where the shooter can get a little bit more of a hold on that thing and pull it out of there if need be. There is also a lanyard loop, or at least a lanyard accommodation, on the butt of the M18. There's not a lot in terms of beveling at the magazine well. At the front is where most of it is, to allow for that magazine to be placed in just like that. But there's just not quite as much around the other surfaces in the mag well. In fact, there's none as compared to the M9A3. Now, I think that's because the idea for a reload with the M18 is that the magazine is supposed to hit this surface here and be pushed into the mag well just like that. Whereas with the M9A3, it just allows a little bit more of a funnel effect to help make sure that magazine feeds. Speaking of magazines, we can take a look at those now. The M9A3 has Beretta's sandproof magazines that are steel but with a special coating to help them function more reliably in a sandy environment. It has witness holes on the back, and these do not have a witness hole for every single round in the magazine, but you can still pull it out of there and get a pretty good idea of how many rounds you have left. Now, interestingly, these are both 17-round magazines, and look at the difference in the length. Maybe I can stand them up to make that a little bit more obvious. Between the two, the Beretta magazine is probably close to half an inch longer than the SIG magazine. And once again, the SIG magazine, and this is the 17-round magazine, has witness holes on the side for 5, 10, and 17 rounds. Now, as I've covered previously, the SIG comes with different magazines. This is the 17-round magazine, and I'll grab one of the bigger ones. So here is the SIG 21-round magazine, and each M18 and M17 pistol comes with a 17-round magazine and two 21-round magazines. And one of the things that's interesting, when I place it next to the 17-round magazine from the M9A3, the 21-round SIG magazine is only slightly longer. It's maybe 1/8 of an inch longer, and maybe not even quite that much. So that's pretty impressive, considering this is a 21-round magazine and this is a 17-round magazine. Again, they are all steel construction for both the SIG magazines and the Beretta magazine. I don't know that the SIG magazines have any special coating to help them work in a sandy environment, but I also suspect that SIG tested these and that the military has tested them by now to make sure that they do in fact function well in that type of an environment. So now we come to what is probably the elephant in the room for the Beretta pistols, and that is the fact that the M9A3 retains the double action first pull and single action for successive pulls trigger system that has been used on the M9 for years and years. For any of you who don't know, when this pistol is loaded and a round is cycled into the chamber, the hammer stays cocked. The shooter then, as I demonstrated earlier, decocks the pistol. From that point, when the pistol is fired, the first shot is fired with a long, heavy double action pull of the trigger, which both cocks the hammer and then releases it. After that, the slide cycles and the hammer stays cocked, and from that point the pistol is fired with a light, short single action pull. This is a trigger system that I had to master years ago. It was not with a Beretta pistol, it was actually with Smith & Wesson pistols, but it is something that can be overcome with training. Even so, there are a lot of people who really do not like that. They want a consistent trigger pull with every single shot, and it's one of the big complaints about these pistols. And I suspect that might be one of the really big factors that caused the military to not want to continue with this type of an action. Conversely, with the SIG pistol, every single pull of the trigger is exactly the same. Now, one thing I do notice as I'm doing this is that the reset on the trigger is much more noticeable and much more distinct on the M18 than it is on the M9A3. It's probably also just a little bit shorter too. So for those of you who are concerned about reset, the M18 has a better reset than the M9A3. So now let's see if we can get a good trigger pull weight on these two pistols to compare that. And I'll try to get a reading on this double action pull. I don't know if I'm going to get it or not. The M9A3 did use an improved hammer spring, and that's actually a pretty good double action pull right there. 8 pounds, 2.5 ounces for the M9A3. Not bad for that double action pull. Let's see what we get on single action. And just over 4 pounds for the single action pull on the M9A3. I know from past experience with the M18 about where it breaks, but we'll see today where it's breaking and it should be pretty much right between those two pulls from the M9A3. £6, 5.9 ounces. So heavier than the single action pull on the M9A3, but considerably lighter than the double action pull, and a consistent pull every time. So for trigger function, first off, for a double action, single action trigger, that's a pretty good one on the M9A3. But it's hard for me to give an advantage because for someone who trains with this trigger system, it has some advantages, one of which being you get a little bit more safety from that longer, heavier double action first pull than you get with the shorter, lighter pull of the M18, although this is not an extremely light trigger, as we just saw. I don't know, the trigger systems are so different. I think this is going to come down to individual shooter preference, so I'm going to call that a draw. Okay, disassembly, reassembly, and ease of maintenance. I don't think either one of these is tremendously difficult to disassemble. With the Beretta, lock the slide to the rear, obviously make sure it's unloaded, push the button on this side of the frame, and then rotate the disassembly lever down on this side. Now the slide will move forward off the rails. Remove the recoil spring guide and recoil spring. Lift up on the barrel. And it comes out just like that. So not at all difficult to disassemble. For the M18, also obviously lock the slide to the rear, make sure it's unloaded, rotate the takedown lever down, and my light just died. Bring the slide and barrel forward off the rails, remove the recoil spring guide and recoil spring, and both pistols are disassembled. Now when it comes to maintenance, I think we do have a clear winner here. With the M9A3, anything that needs to be repaired in this pistol is going to have to require the pistol itself to be completely disassembled, the defective part removed and replaced with a new, properly functioning part, and then the pistol is going to have to be reassembled and put back into service. With the M18, and I've mentioned this in past videos, due to the modular system, if there is a defective part in the fire control unit, that part can simply, the entire fire control unit can simply be removed from the pistol, replaced with a new one. Then the armorer at his or her leisure can repair the defective fire control unit and then return that in another pistol, or if need be, just discard it and replace it with a brand new fire control unit altogether. Any other parts that may be damaged or defective on the M18 can be dealt with in much the same way, simply by replacing them with a new part. And there's really not going to be a lot in terms of detailed disassembly or repair that has to be done when it comes to the M18. As I said, with the M9A3, it's going to be a little bit more involved in its maintenance. So in this respect, I think the M18 does have a distinct advantage when it comes to maintenance. And real quick, reassembly for both pistols. I'll start with the M9A3 and reinstall the barrel, just like that. And if I can get the locking block to cooperate there. There we go. Recoil spring and recoil spring guide go back in. Slide goes back on the frame and move back into position. Lock to the rear. Disassembly lever is moved back to the assembled position. And the M9A3 is all back together. I should have timed these to see if there's any advantage in how quickly they go back together. It helps when you don't drop the parts. Now, I mentioned this in the last video with the M18. The recoil spring assembly has an oblong piece on the back that has to go back in the proper orientation. It has to be, as you hold the slide with the sights pointed down, it has to be the oblong part or the long part pointed up. And it can be either way. I could rotate it 180 degrees and it would still be fine, but it does have to be in there that way. If you have the oblong point horizontally, it's not going to go back together properly. And I said then, I think that's really one of the things that for a general issue pistol to all kinds of people with different types of experience, I think is weird to have one part that has to go back in a very specific orientation. We did not notice that with any of the reassembly of the M9A3. So now let's take a look at weight. Weight is always a concern for anyone who has to carry a lot of gear over a long distance. And this is going to be with both pistols fully loaded because I don't see much reason to weigh them unloaded since no one carries them that way. The M9A3 is on the scale right now. And as you can see, with a fully loaded magazine and a round in the chamber, it's coming in at just over 2.5 pounds. That's about 41 ounces right there for the fully loaded 17-round magazine and 1 round in the chamber for the M9A3. And the M18 has now taken its place on the official Cabela scale. And as we can see, with the fully loaded magazine and 1 round in the chamber, it's coming in almost 1/2 pound lighter than the M9A3. It's just over 2 pounds there. That might be 33, maybe 34 ounces. But again, significantly lighter with the 17-round magazine. Now let's switch over and weigh it with the 21-round magazine and see how much difference that makes. And with the 21-round magazine in place, we can see that the M18 is still coming in about 4 ounces lighter than the M9A3 with the 17-round magazine. And I think that's significant in terms of size efficiency and the amount of ammunition an individual Marine or soldier can carry with them in their handgun. We see that even with more ammunition, 4 rounds more of ammunition on board, the M18 is still coming in measurably lighter than the M9A3. So do we have a clear winner in our comparison here? Well, with the M18, the Marine Corps specifically, and the military in general, is getting a more compact, lighter, easier to maintain handgun with a higher ammunition capacity and a modular design, whereas with the M9A3, they would have been able to stick with the more familiar firearms platform that would have had some of the support gear that would have transferred over and still been a very reliable, robust, good military pistol. I think probably in terms of the benefits offered by the M18 for modern military operations, it probably does have the advantage. Of course, it comes along with the caveat that it sort of falls in line with the modern disposable type of equipment mentality. Even so, I think for the average Marine or the average soldier who is using this pistol, they're going to appreciate the lightweight, they're going to appreciate the extra capacity, and the more compact footprint of the pistol. In some instances, they will appreciate the ability to add an optic. But here again, I feel like the M9A3 didn't quite get a fair shot because I think had it been evaluated and some of these other considerations had been made known to Beretta, they could have done things like shorten the overall length, added the ability to accommodate an optic, so forth and so on, and probably come up with a pistol that would have been very comparable in terms of its size and performance to the M18 or some of the other submissions to the modular handgun system. But it would have still had the double action, single action trigger. And I think that's probably the last consideration in this evaluation for the shooters that get a minimal amount of training and they have to be able to use this pistol if they are going into some sort of combat operations or using it for whatever their assignment might be. Those shooters are going to be more easily and more quickly trained with the pistol that has the consistent trigger than the one that they're going to have to learn that trigger transition. As I said earlier, that's something I learned a long time ago. I don't think that's a major concern, but for a lot of shooters, particularly those that have to get through training quickly and get out to do whatever their job might be, it's just going to be a little quicker and easier to train them on a pistol that has this type of a trigger system. So there you have it, folks. That's my comparison video between the Marine Corps' new M18 and the M9A3. If you have any questions or comments, as always, make sure you forward those to me. Remember, if you purchase anything from Optics Planet, be sure to use my discount code, which is... And if you use that discount code, it's good for 5% off anything you purchase from Optics Planet. Also remember, warbirdbunker.com is making t-shirts for the channel, and there are 2 new t-shirts and also some HR Funk stickers up there for the holidays. So if you're interested in any of that gear, go to warbirdbunker.com, and if you use my discount code there, which is HRFunk4U, that'll get you 10% off anything you purchase from warbirdbunker.com. See you next time, folks. And until then, good shooting. Bye-bye.